Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. We are going to get started. Wow, this is a really crowded room here. Welcome. We're really happy to have you here. I want to say hello to our YouTube and C-SPAN audience. We love it when C-SPAN covers our events, so thank you so much for being here. My name is Kimberly Begg. I am the president of the Luce Center. We are a nonprofit organization that specializes in the conservative outreach, education, and mentorship of young women for the purpose of preparing and promoting conservative women leaders. We have a fantastic program for you today. Clare Morell will be speaking. Clare will be speaking about her new book. She will have a proper introduction in just a minute. But I just wanted to tell you that I have been trying to get Clare to speak here at the center for well over a year. She was hard at work on her manuscript, the results of which you will see in just a few minutes. Clare will be here after her remarks for a book signing and for pictures and for conversation. So I hope that you will join us for that. I want to say a huge thank you to Lauren McHugh-Snyder, who sponsored this event today with her very, very generous gift. Lauren is not only a very good friend and a President's Club member, she is a former intern and a graduate of our programs here at the Luce Center. Lauren is not here today, but I'm hoping that she will watch this program and will see our gratitude and our thank you here. I also want to point out a few special guests who are here today. G. Van Fleet is here today. There's G. Wonderful. She's going to be signing copies of her book for our interns, and she has a new book coming out in a few months. And I haven't asked you to speak yet, but G, I hope that you'll come back and you'll speak for us here. Stella Moravito is here today. Where's Stella? Stella is a Soviet propaganda expert, and she recently appeared on our brand new podcast, Gen Z Unplugged. So I hope you will all take a look at that episode. And then my dear friend Liz Ortner is here of the Ortner Family Foundation. And been trying to get Liz and her husband Mike here for about a year now. So I'm really, really happy to have you here, Liz. So thank you for being here. So, okay, you all have a sheet of paper in front of you that lists some of the upcoming events. I just want to call your attention to some of the programs that are going to be right here at the Luce Center in the next few months. We're going to have Austin Roos here next Friday night. That is a program for our President's Club. If you're interested in attending, please come see me or Catherine Hendershot, who is here, and she'll be up at the microphone later on in the program. Leslie Manukian will be here in September. Rachel Gressler from the Heritage Foundation will be here in October. Sarah Kane in November, and Becky Norton Dunlop in December. So I know you're all eager to hear from Clare. At this time, I would like to welcome up to the podium Anastasia Levis. Anastasia is one of our 10 summer interns here, and she is a rising senior at Benedictine College. Please join me in welcoming Anastasia.
Hello, everyone, and welcome today. I am very honored to welcome Clare Morell. Clare is a fellow with the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and there directs the EPPC's Technology and Human Flourishing project. Previously, Clare worked at the Department of Justice as an advisor to Attorney General Bill Barr, where she assisted in overseeing the President's Commission on Law Enforcement and the Administration of Justice, and was editor of the Commission's final report. Much of this work dealt with the obstacles big tech presented to law enforcement. Before her time at the Department of Justice, Clare worked on judicial nominations for the White House Counsel's office. Ms. Morell received a Bachelor of Science in Foreign Service from Georgetown University's Walsh School of Foreign Service, where she studied science, technology, and international affairs. She graduated summa cum laude and received the Edmund A. Walsh Award for Academic Achievement in International Law. Today, she will be speaking on her recent release, The Tech Exit, a practical guide to freeing kids and teens from smartphones. While this is the first book that Clare has released, she is not new to published writing. Clare's opinion pieces have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Fox News, the New York Post, the Daily Signal, National Review, First Things, the Federalist, and so much more. Beyond this, Clare has testified before Congress, and her policy work has been featured in the New York Times. She has been interviewed on television for Fox News, Blaze TV, EWTN, and more. The Luce Center has long been a fan of Clare's accomplishments in protection against disorder technology. According to our advisory board member, Emily Jashinsky, who was a favorite speaker last week at our DC summit. Clare has almost single-handedly driven more policy change to protect children from online harm than anyone else in the country. Clare is a wife and mother to 3 children, making the professional expertise in her book ring true with personal interest. I'm so grateful to have Clare Morell here today and to have the opportunity to hear from a woman leader who courageously works for human flourishing in a technological world. Please join me in welcoming Clare Morell.
Thank you all so much for having me. This is a fancy podium. I'm just going to raise it a little bit. Oh, wow. This is like good technology. Well, thank you so much for coming to this talk. I'm so honored to see you all. And I just want to, in our time today, explain a little bit of the reasons why I wrote my new book, The Tech Exit, and then give you an overview of what it is arguing for. So the short answer up front is that I could find no books making a maximalist argument to not give social media and smartphones to our children at all. All the technology and parenting books that I surveyed in my quest to find good resources to recommend to parents all accepted this premise that digital tech was inevitable for our kids. And there was really no book telling parents that it was okay and actually possible to opt out entirely and how to do that. And so that is the book that I wrote. And so as I've worked in the public policy space for the last 5 years, it has been my goal to protect children from online dangers through recommending and advising lawmakers on needed changes in the law. But in this role, I increasingly found myself speaking with parents on the front lines who are looking for concrete, everyday advice. And so this struggle to find a good resource to recommend to parents is really what led me to write my book. And so even though my work has been focused on policy, the book is not written to policymakers primarily. It's actually written to parents who are on the front lines. And I deal with a little bit of possible policy solutions at the end of the book for what lawmakers can do to help back parents up. But I really wanted parents to know that it is possible to give children a smartphone-free childhood. And I wanted to also address why the current strategies that the tech companies have sold to parents, namely screen time limits and parental controls, were not sufficient for the level and nature of the kinds of harms coming through these addictive screen technologies. And so my book holds out a better way, that a smartphone-free childhood is both necessary, but even better, it's actually possible. And so first, I want to explain a little bit of the research that I've been doing to make the case for why this is necessary and why screen time limits and parental controls fall short. And then I want to spend the second half of our time thinking about the solutions that are needed and what parents can do to actually give them the practical steps to exiting these technologies. And so just so you know, very clearly from the front, the answer that I became convinced of, along with the dozens of families that I've interviewed, plus hundreds more I've heard of, is that what is necessary to protect our kids, their bodies, their brains, and ultimately their souls in this digital age is a complete opt-out. So let's dive in. First, screen time limits are not enough. The technology is turning our children into addicts. So we have a root metaphor problem when it comes to digital technology. We have been told to treat the interactive screens, smartphones, and social media like sugar, something that is dangerous in large amounts, but can be enjoyed in moderation. But my diving into the neuroscience research about the impacts this has on the brain was increasingly revealing to me that it's actually not like sugar, that these technologies act on the brain more like a highly addictive drug. And brain scans actually show that the brain scans of heavy users of social media look exactly the same as users of highly addictive drugs. The structural changes in the brain are the same in those side-by-side MRIs. And the problem, especially for our kids, is that their developing brains are especially vulnerable. So the brain actually goes through significant changes at around the age of 10. Their dopamine receptors in the brain multiply, which is a normal process of human development. These receptors are multiplying because it's trying to help us turn outward for social feedback, peer approval from our broader communities. And so as children start to form stronger relationships outside the home, they're made for relationships with their peers. Just at this time that these kind of social reward components of the brain are rapidly developing, these dopamine receptors are multiplying. Now, often children are getting on smartphones and social media, and the high artificially high levels of dopamine that those technologies are releasing are then hijacking those precise brain vulnerabilities. And the brain also is going through significant structural changes. The scientific terms are myelination and pruning. And so the myelination is that these nerve endings, these axons, are getting coated in myelin, which increases the connections between neurons and speeds up the signals. Pruning is that the brain actually starts to become more efficient by cutting away pathways in the brain that aren't being used and reducing those parts so that it can be more efficient. And so people say what fires together, wires together. So the parts of the brain that are being used are becoming faster and more connected, and the parts that aren't being used are being pruned away. What's happening with social media is then these reward pathways in the brain triggered by dopamine are becoming hardwired. And a study out of the University of North Carolina found that habitual checkers of social media, 6th and 7th grade students who are checking social media multiple times a day, over time, they followed them longitudinally. Their brain showed changes where they became overly sensitive to the kinds of social rewards that social media gives. And this process is called sensitization. And they use this in addiction science to explain why people become very sensitized to a particular drug. It means they start to crave it more. And it's because those parts of the brain are becoming more connected. And so the triggers, the cues involved make them highly sensitive to experience strong compulsions, strong cravings towards this particular kind of stimulus. And so they're seeing this in kids who are habitually checking social media, that the brain actually changes over time and becomes more sensitive to those kinds of social rewards. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex of the brain is not fully developed till the age of 25. And this is the part of our brain that is necessary for self-control, emotional regulation, impulse control, the precise part of the brain that actually can help put brakes when we're using something too much, when we're engaging in those compulsive behaviors. And so one neuroscientist explained that a child's brain on social media is like all gas pedal and no brakes. And that actually over time, the structural changes in the brain stunt the development of that prefrontal cortex. It actually makes it more difficult for children then to develop those skills of self-control and emotional regulation that we need. And this isn't just happening from overuse. And this is what I try to explain to parents, that when your child, even if they're only on 30 minutes of social media a day, it elicits this really high level of dopamine response in the brain. And it feels good when they're on it. When they immediately get off the app, their brain compensates to come back to homeostasis by actually going into a dopamine deficit state. It doesn't go back to the baseline, it goes below baseline, which creates a craving to go back on and do it again. So dopamine doesn't produce lasting satisfaction, it only produces craving. And so even if a child's only on it for 30 minutes a day, they then go into the state of craving and wanting to do it again, because again, it acts on the brain like a drug. And so I try to explain for parents that the screen time limits don't map onto a child's mental or emotional time spent in the app. They live in the virtual world long after they leave it because of this craving that it produces. Last example I'll share on the time limits is a doctor named Victoria Dunkley was seeing kids in her practice coming in for symptoms of autism and ADHD. They were exhibiting a lot of just behaviors like poor focus, struggle paying attention, big mood swings, tantrums, all sorts of externalizing behaviors. And she found just doing a 30-day digital detox for some of those patients eliminated their symptoms entirely. They did not actually have autism or ADHD. Their use of interactive screens had induced these symptoms in their nervous systems. And then for patients who truly did have that condition, just eliminating interactive screens for 30 days cut the symptoms in half without any other treatment. And so she terms this syndrome electronic screen syndrome. And she warns parents this is not just from excessive use of screens, but even regular use can accumulate these negative stress effects on a child's developing nervous system, because the screen interaction puts our brain's amygdala into this kind of fight or flight response, which releases these stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline in the brain. And without any physical activity to discharge those hormones, the brain then stays in this kind of chronic stress state, and that accumulates over time. And so that's part of the reason she recommends the detox. And this is the hope I offer to parents in the book as well, is that detoxing is possible and our brains can actually recalibrate and come down off of those stress responses. And so those are just some of the reasons why the screen time limits don't work, because even a small amount of time is very disruptive and dysregulating to a child's developing brain and nervous system. My second point is that parental controls are a myth. And the result then is that digital technology is habituating children towards vice rather than virtue. So social media companies have worked really hard to convince parents that if we just enable parental controls on their apps, our kids will be safe. And so Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat, they all offer these parental supervision tools. But if you look into this, the teen always has to accept the parent's supervision, and they can cancel it at any time. The parent will get a notification that it was canceled, but still, the parent is not the one in the driver's seat, the teen is. Secondly, even that supervision is extremely limited. It mainly allows parents to set time limits or certain privacy settings and restrictions, but it does nothing to actually put the parent in the driver's seat over the child's experience on social media. Parents are not in control, their algorithms are. And so parents cannot see into what is in a child's feed, what the algorithm is feeding up to them. They can't choose the kinds of content kids can see in their social media feeds or even see into their direct messages. And so children are unfortunately being exposed to really dangerous content and bad actors that it's all they're too easily able to access children through these social media platforms. And so if the parents can't meaningfully oversee their children's online activities, and if the account restrictions can't truly be locked in by a parent, then the idea that these are parental controls is a myth. And the sad thing is, some parents may not realize they purchase like an external parental control software. The worst apps, Snapchat, TikTok, they block any access by third-party controls or filters. And so a child can actually access Pornhub from within the Snapchat app. Every app has an in-app browser without ever leaving the app. And because the parental control softwares can't see into these particularly egregious apps, even if you do all the work to install an external parental control software, parents really are flying blind and would have no idea that that is the kind of content their child could be accessing inside of the Snapchat app. To them, if they had the monitoring software set up, it just looks like, oh, my child just spent an hour in Snapchat, but they have no idea what is going on inside the app. And so sadly, parents are flying blind when it comes to social media. And it's not just social media apps. I want to make this point about why the smartphone is so dangerous. There are just hundreds and thousands of apps in the App Store. It's impossible for parents to effectively lock down a smartphone because every app has its own portal to the internet. Even the apps that look innocuous, like an educational game, now all have these social media components where complete strangers can message children through these apps, where there's an in-app browser that they could still access dangerous content on the internet. And so I go through some examples in my book of teens, even like the Bible app, being a source where teens were exchanging nude photos using this share a scripture feature. Strangers were reaching out to teens. And to a parent, I just thought my child was on the Bible app for 30 minutes that day, reading the Bible, as one would assume. And so it's very, very difficult to effectively lock down all the dangerous portals to the internet on children's feeds. And so the cumulative effect of this is that children are being exposed to really violent, highly sexualized content on social media. The entire environment incentivizes children to post sexual material, engage in sexual interactions. And so it's habituating our children towards vice instead of virtue. And so I want to just summarize this by saying that the great digital paradox that we're facing is that children are being exposed to sexual and adult content more than ever before in human history. They carry it with them in their pockets 24/7, but yet at the same time, because of the brain science I was mentioning, children have never been less prepared to handle it because the design of the technology is actually stunting children's ability to develop into mature adults with self-control. And then the other problem is that they're thrust into this adult online world without any adults to look out for them there because the parental controls are meaningless. And so I just want to say that to you all, especially this next generation, that we're in a battle really for the souls of this next generation in our country, because what parents want for their kids is also what's best for the nation. We want free and virtuous women and men to be contributing members of society who will make their country a better place and who are qualified to serve as leaders. But the big tech companies are working to form a different kind of person. They want children to hand over as much of their time, attention, and data as possible. And smartphones and social media, as I mentioned, are not designed to be used responsibly. They're designed to overpower our self-control. And they're turning this generation into unthinking, dopamine addicted users. And I know that sounds severe, but the problem is that the traits that are incentivized by the online world are maladapted for the real world. The technology is creating dependence and addiction instead of independence and freedom. And it rewards and celebrates self-focus and self-expression rather than responsibility and service to others. And it's a world that is just built on metrics like likes and shares and reshares, superficial connections instead of real friendship and trust and conversation. And it trains our brains to skim and to switch between tasks instead of learning to focus, read deeply, think complexly and critically. And so the cumulative impact and the spiritual component and the deeper components about human flourishing is that it's really training a generation that the medium is the message, that regardless of the content on the screen, the kind of behavior that the technology incentivizes is wiring us for consumption instead of production and training us to think that the purpose of life is entertainment and amusement and pleasure instead of fostering our creativity, our problem-solving abilities, and teaching us to love and serve others. And so this is a deeper problem that the screen time limits and parental controls are not adequate to help us get out of. And so we are at a hinge point in our culture. I see this on a daily basis that our parents are in direct competition with these big tech companies, that they have different goals. Our goals are not aligned with the goals of the tech companies. And whoever wins that competition is going to determine what kinds of people are formed, what the future citizens of our country are like, and therefore what kind of nation we become. And so this is really the reason I wrote The Tech Exit. I'm a mom of 3 kids, and so my children were forefront in my mind in thinking about writing this book, because obviously in my own capacity, I could keep my children from these technologies, but I didn't want to accept that they were going to grow up in a world where the smartphones were ubiquitous among their peers and among children. I wanted to help other parents, and I actually really want this book to change the culture around smartphones and social media in childhood. I want it to become like smoking. I want these things to become taboo during childhood, and we can change the culture. Parents working together, resisting these things in our community is how these solutions start and grow. And so that was my motivation behind the book. And so just to end on a positive note, what can parents do? What must we do to win this fight against the big tech companies? And so this is the whole focus of my book. The chapters I just summarized about screen time limits and parental controls is just the beginning, but the majority of the book is actually how do we exit from these technologies? And so I start with individual parents, and then I work outwards in concentric circles to what schools can then do to back parents up and what policymakers can do to support parents. And so just briefly, I will give the definition of what the tech exit is, which is no smartphones, social media, tablets, I know that's a controversial one, or video games during childhood. And so I want to first explain that if you've already given these things to your kids, it's not too late. I hold out this hope to parents in the book that it's actually never too late to reverse course. As I was mentioning that doctor recommending the detoxes in her practice, it is possible to detox from these technologies. And there is a science behind this, that after 30 days off of all the interactive screens, the brain's dopamine levels renormalize. It no longer becomes in this kind of dopamine deficit state, having these constant cravings and compulsions. And so they can kind of return to start experiencing the normal pleasures of life. Because I didn't even mention this point, but that the use of these dopamine technologies actually desensitizes us to feeling pleasure in the real world. And so this is one of the reasons so many teenagers are depressed today, is that they actually do find the real world and real life to feel very mundane and very boring because they've become desensitized to those real world pleasures. So the detox actually helps kids start to enjoy real life again. Their brains normalize, their nervous systems come down out of that fight or flight mode. And so it's incredibly encouraging, the families I spoke with, just how successful detoxes can be for anyone at any age, at any time. I often hear from parents, well, he's 14 and he's already had the smartphone for 2 years. It's too late. And it's actually not. You have 4 more years with that child before he leaves home. That's 4 more years to help set him up well for adult life, where you can actually help him reform and reshape his habits to not be dependent or craving the smartphone and to enter adulthood with those skills of self-control. And so I do think it's just important to remember I don't want parents to feel bad or to feel shamed or judged for their decisions. We make the best decisions we have with the information at the time. And so I want parents to be armed with this information and this message of hope and courage that it's never too late to reverse course and to say, you know what, I'm sorry, we made a mistake. This technology is too powerful for you. And so we're going to do a detox, and then we're going to live off of this technology so that you can really experience pleasures in the real world, like holding out a positive vision for our kids. And so much of the book is really focused on the positive. So now let me walk through. So after detoxing, after we fast from these technologies, how do we keep going over the long term? And I used the acronym FEAST in my book because I wanted it to be this positive vision of when we fast from these digital technologies, we're feasting on real life. And so just briefly, the acronym FEAST stands for F, find other families. I was mentioning just that strength in numbers, the power in our communities. And so many of the families I interviewed said that what made them successful was just finding one or two other families who were agreeing to also not give their children smartphones and social media. So it doesn't have to be everyone in your community or everyone in your neighborhood or your school, but just finding a little contingent to create these kind of counter pressures against smartphones with you is really powerful. And I give some just hope-filled examples in the book of one neighborhood outside of Washington, D.C., where just two moms on the street started talking to each other. And they were actually not talking about restricting tech as much as the positive vision that they wanted for their kids' childhood. Like, we want our neighborhood to be filled with kids riding bikes outside, playing on the yard, running around the woods. And they started to create that. So their sons were playing outside together, no phones. And it became compelling to all the other kids on the street. So even children who didn't necessarily share their tech restrictions, it just created that counter pressure so that other kids started going outside. And so she just explained just the power of that kind of strength in numbers. A few families coming together can actually do a lot to kind of push the pressure away from phones. So that's F, find other families. And it really just starts with a conversation with your friends to open this conversation about resisting smartphones for our kids. E is explain, educate, and exemplify. I often get asked, okay, but won't kids just resent these decisions, and won't they just go off and binge later when they're in college? Well, I found that was not the case at all in the families I spoke to, but that was because an important part of this tech exit was actually doing a lot of work to explain the reasons to their kids, to actually educate their children on the harms they were trying to protect them from a place of love and trust. And that actually trying to work to get their kids buy-in. It doesn't mean their children accepted all these things at the time or loved the effects of those decisions, but that they could understand why their parents were doing it. And they wanted their buy-in because they recognized our children are going to leave home someday. We want them to be prepared to face these digital dangers and temptations on their own as an adult. And so we need to both do everything we can to protect them, but we also need to prepare them. And so that preparing them, which is this another common myth, does not look like handing a young child a smartphone and trying to train them on the technology, but it does look like explaining the dangers, how to think wisely about internet use, and then exemplifying it as parents. This is how we train kids on technologies that they may use as adults. I mean, you think about even motor vehicles. We're not letting young children drive cars, but we're modeling how to drive safely as a parent. And then at an appropriate age, we start to train them on it. And so there's lots of real world analogies to draw on. But the main principle is just not giving a child a technology that's too powerful for them before they have the self-mastery to use it. And that protecting those years of 0 to 18 for them to develop those habits and that self-mastery means they actually will be more capable of using it responsibly as adults. And these children that I interviewed did not go off and binge in college. In fact, their peers were very addicted to their phones, and they were not, because they were like, I'm not used to being on my phone all the time. I mean, they truly learned to use it as a tool for communication. They didn't have these habits ingrained of compulsively checking it. So the binging later myth, or the binging later is a myth, and actually, but part of the protection from that is like explaining, educating our kids, and exemplifying for them as parents, which is very convicting, just what a healthy use of technology looks like. Okay, so that's explain, educate, and exemplify. A is adopt alternatives. I just really wanted parents to know there are better phone options available for kids than smartphones, even now than there were 2 or 3 years ago, that there are phones that allow a child to call or text when they get to an age where they truly do need to have some device to communicate. So the commonality in these families were delay the age of first cell phone as long as possible. But then when a child was moving around more independently or driving, they did want them to have something they used to be in touch with their parents. And so they opted for an alternative phone to a smartphone. And I give lots of examples in the appendix, but the Gab phone, Pinwheel phone, Bark phone, Wise phone, there are so many now that offer children the tools they need without any internet, addictive apps, social media whatsoever. And so opting for alternatives and just not accepting the inevitability of the smartphone. If they were told their child was required to have a certain app to participate in a sports team, they found a workaround with the coach. Like, we're not getting a smartphone just so my kid can be on this soccer team. You can find a way to keep us in touch or in the loop on these things. We don't need to just give in to the smartphone. So that's adopt alternatives. Then S stands for setting up digital accountability in the home and family screen rules. So I try to explain that people are often concerned that then the kids who don't have these smartphones and social media won't be prepared for the workplace or college in this technological age. So I try to explain that the smartphone and social media do not equal tech skills. Okay, they teach children how to scroll, to jump between apps, to be entertained. But so these families that said no to smartphones and social media did, in age-appropriate ways, start to allow their children to use a home computer and to use the internet for very specific purposes. One family, they had a 13-year-old very interested in computer science, so he checked out these computer science textbooks from the library. He was reading through them, and they would let him use the family computer to practice his coding skills. And then he won a coding scholarship in Ohio and is going to college on a full ride, and he never had a smartphone. And so he's very prepared for this digital age in this workplace, and he learns that by reading books and practicing his skills actually using the computer as a tool. And so there are ways to use technology intentionally in the home to teach our children how to use them as tools to develop the skills that they may need for the workplace, but that doesn't equate to giving a child a smartphone or social media. And so that chapter just explains how to think through internet use in the home. These families, the main principles were using it always publicly and purposefully. So it was like a home computer in a public space. Everyone could see what they were doing. And there was always a very intentional reason they were going on. It wasn't to go on to watch YouTube videos. It was, I'm going to go do this assignment for school, or I'm going to do this research project, or I want to practice my coding skills. So there was a purpose to it. And then these families are not completely anti-screen. A lot of them did own a television, but it was a sparing activity that was not a daily habit, and it was something that was always enjoyed together. I think so often these days, every individual family member is on their own tablet or screen enjoying their very individualized entertainment. These families really push back against that. And so I always say the bigger the screen, the better. Something that is large enough for everyone to enjoy together. And so they would use it intentionally, watching a sports game on a Saturday together, or a Friday night family movie night. So this doesn't mean there's no screen entertainment ever, but that it's sparing and shared. And then the last thing I'll say is the importance of digital accountability in the home. So at whatever age was appropriate, these children may have gotten their first email account or some type of dumb phone where there is texting. There was always an expectation between parent and child that there was going to be accountability for those communication channels. There was no completely private channel of digital communication that a child would have outside of a parent's authority. And so the parents said that even that expectation of accountability was itself the protection from their children falling into just dangerous things, even on email group chats or group texts on phones. Like, a lot of bad things can even happen in those. And so just this expectation of digital accountability for a parent to be able to check those channels if they had a concern, to have a conversation with their kid about it. Okay, last letter in the acronym is T. This was my favorite chapter to write, and T stands for trading screens for real life responsibilities and pursuits. And so that's why, again, the feast is this feasting on real life. These families filled their children's time with just real world goods. They helped them pursue real life friendships. And a lot of parents did note to me the importance as a parent in this digital age of actually trying to intentionally help your child build a social life in the real world. It actually takes more work. Now that all these teens are on social media, it takes more work on the part of parents to help get children together, hosting kids at your house, driving them 15 minutes to a friend's house who's not on a smartphone so they can have that in-person time. And so I do get that fear a lot. Well, if I don't give the smartphone or social media, my child's going to be lonely. They're not going to have friends. And that's a real concern if we aren't working as parents to help them build those friendships in the real world that they need. But the social media is not a replacement for those. In fact, the social media just really incentivizes a lot of shallow connections, because I will tell you, these kids who are more connected than ever are also extremely lonely. We don't get oxytocin through a screen. So oxytocin is another important hormone, and it bonds us to other humans. It bonds a mother with her baby, husband and wife. It bonds friends because it's released through eye contact, being in person with someone, physical touch, and we can't get that through a screen. And so these friendships online are extremely shallow. And so instead, we do want to work to help our children build those real life friendships, to have deep, genuine friendships. And so this chapter was all about the ways that parents pursued those real world responsibilities and pursuits for their kids. And my last point on this that I found really interesting and encouraging from the families I spoke to was it wasn't just a matter of filling kids' time with hobbies, but actually helping them take on responsibilities in the real world that will help them to progress towards adulthood. So having young children take on chores around the house, older kids start to take on service projects in the community, just teaching them to think of others, to love and serve others, these relationships of mutual responsibility and dependence, which are really important and are like the exact opposite of the screen. The screen just teaches you to serve yourself. It's all self-focused, which is incredibly anxiety-inducing. I mean, this is why teens are struggling with anxiety. They think that the whole world revolves around how many people liked their photo. And so teaching kids to serve and love others in the real world is such a powerful antidote to that anxiety. And even teaching them that we depend on each other, that we are made for relationships with other people, versus the screen, again, incentivizes this kind of independence. I don't really need anyone. I can just go to the internet. I can just go online, and I don't need to depend on people in the real world. Okay, so that's Feast in a quick breeze over nutshell, but please read the more detailed version in the book. And then lastly, I'll just say, parents, we do need support from our schools and from our policymakers. And so I also address things that schools can do, like phone bans, or even some schools have taken it even further, doing like a no social media policy, having these certain social media accounts when you're a student at our school, and just other creative ideas, trying to provide more extracurricular options for kids so that time after school, they can do something at the school instead of just going home to a screen. And so I address what schools can do and also what laws can really help support parents, which is the main laws that I have been working on. So I just want to end by saying I'm so encouraged. So many of you were nodding along as I was speaking. So it's always nice to feel like I have agreement in the audiences I'm speaking with. But I do just want to say, if we want our children to be truly happy and successful and to reach their highest potential in service to God and others, the truly most important thing we can do is to get rid of these screens and replace them, as I was saying, with those activities that turn our focus outward, and just be confident. Like, this is the path to true joy and fulfillment. And just being that positive force in our communities, it's so appealing, because I think no one feels satisfied by the screens, and often parents just feel pressured into them. And so being that positive force for change that says, I don't give my child a smartphone, and these are all the things that we're doing instead. Like, you can paint that beautiful vision for them of what life can look like off the screens. And so I will say that removing the digital tech from childhood is the first step. But the far greater task ahead of all of us is reclaiming true human flourishing. And I know you all are doing that in your respective spheres. And so I hope you'll join me on this journey of reclaiming childhood from the screens and helping them pursue true human flourishing. So thank you. And I look forward to any questions.
Thank you so much. What a fascinating topic. There are a lot of young women in this room who I'm sure would like to be mothers in the future. And as technology becomes more and more prevalent, we're going to need your words more and more. So thank you for that. Yeah. We'll have time for questions now. I'd ask, please raise your hand. We'll bring a microphone to you. And please state your name and where you're from.
Hi, thank you so much for being here today, Claire. My name's Hannah. I'm from Concerned Women for America. We're in Alexandria. Yeah. Two of our core issues are defending family and fighting sexual exploitation. So thank you so much for all the work you do.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So like I was saying, those are our interests. And we're concerned with the skyrocketing amount of children who are becoming confused with their gender and their bodies, and seeking to either socially or medically transition to the opposite sex. And we see that as maybe being from online exploitation. Did you come across that in your research at all?
Yes. I'm really glad you brought that point up. Especially in conservative audiences, I do try to mention that one of the dangers really is that people who completely share a different worldview from us are now accessing our children on the internet. And so when we hand a child a smartphone, we're basically inviting the entire world into the task of parenting that child with us. People who don't share our worldview, and LGBT activists are using social media to groom and recruit young children into their movement, into their lifestyle. I will tell you, I can't think of a story I have heard of a parent who has struggled with a child who's trying to transition their gender or wanting to transition their gender that didn't somehow involve social media. It almost always started online, because how else would they have even found out about this lifestyle? And often they were just kind of lured in by these activists, these trans influencer accounts, and then it just quickly spirals from there. And part of that is the dangerous algorithms that these apps are using, where even if a child's just curious and they watch a video for 20 seconds, the app instantly goes to work putting more and more extreme content of that kind into their feed. And so it's very easy for children to stumble into dangerous rabbit holes online. And and so anyway, I'm grateful that you brought that up, because I do see that intersection. It is something I particularly try to highlight for families. And I will say, I kind of wanted to include it in the book. There were a lot of editorial decisions made to try to actually make this book as widely appealing as possible to parents. So I'm actually hoping the book bridges the partisan divide and reaches even families who don't necessarily share all of our conservative principles. And so there were some decisions made. Instead, I focused on the kind of hyper-sexualized nature of these platforms, but the trans movement is one of those hyper-sexualizations of the platforms. I just didn't specifically name that aspect, but more just spoke broadly of how sexualized these algorithms and the metrics make these applications. So thank you for the work you're doing on that issue. I appreciate it. I saw you first, sorry.
Thank you again. A lot of my peers in Gen Z, we have a good conversations about how we've seen online pornography and social media use really harm our generation. We're sort of waking up. We're kind of sick of it. But a lot of these conversations are very quick to condemn online pornography because of the content, and then sort of brush over social media because, the content's okay, it's artistic. But as you said, the medium is the message. So how do we approach these conversations with our peers, sort of like reaffirming, like, no, a lot of the problems with addictive online pornography is the medium and is the technological platform, and how that also applies to seemingly harmless social media.
No, I appreciate you raising that. I think one of the big things that I would point to is that the same way that pornography is addicting, like social media has those same addictive impacts on the brain. And even regardless of whether or not the content is dangerous or extremely sexual, it still is influencing our brain, as I mentioned, by the message, because it teaches our brain to scroll, and it really kind of puts us in what they call these dopamine chasing loops, because your brain just is always searching for that next hit of dopamine. And then as soon as you have it crashes and you're just immediately on to the next thing, and it escalates. We increasingly are looking for more and more novelty, which then can social media can really quickly also feed into seeking out more extreme things like pornography. And so often they go together. My husband is a pastor and deals a lot with counseling young men coming out of pornography addictions. And they often all say that their addictions actually started with social media use as a kid, not even coming across necessarily sexual content, but just getting into this pattern of always watching the next video, always searching for the next kind of dopamine hit, the novelty. So a lot of them had just started even with mundane kind of YouTube videos, and those habits kind of even formed through social media. Then when they discovered pornography was on steroids, in terms of really being very difficult for struggling with addiction. And I point out to people, especially young adults who can make these decisions for themselves, all the impacts on the brain and your thinking, your quality of life, your mental health. There's so much research out there now to say, I don't think this is the kind of life that you want for yourself. I don't think anyone is oh yeah, I want to be an addict and I want to be dependent on something. And so trying to point out that pornography, of course, is one of those substances, but also social media too is really addictive and is not giving us the kind of life that we want, not giving us the real life friendships that we really need as humans. And just, it really leaves you feeling terrible after you use it. I think people go to social media to relax, and after 30 minutes they get off and then they just feel terrible. That was just a really disappointing experience, because again, your brain kind of crashes into this dopamine deficit state. And so you actually feel worse after using it than you did before going on. And so I think just trying to point those effects out to people is a way to help them see that for themselves.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Jenny. I'm an intern here at the Luce Center. And my question is, how should kids and teens deal with peer pressure from their peers at school?
That's a great question. Yeah, and that's actually part of why I wrote that chapter about explaining and educating is I want to make sure we're like arming our kids to even explain the reasons like why we don't do smartphones in our family and to also train them. I've had a lot of parents explain like they actually trained their kids to not look at phones because of the kinds of possible danger that someone could just stick in their face. If they're offered it, they're like, oh, no, thank you. We don't look at phones in my family, and just giving them these ways out. And so I think helping prepare them for how to talk to their peers. I think, again, kind of like I answered Anastasia's question, just about explaining the science behind it, what we're trying to protect our brains from. On that note, a really helpful resource by a woman who runs an organization called Screen Strong. She wrote this book called Kids, Brains, and Screens. I loved reading it because I'm like, this is a level of neuroscience I can understand, because she kind of breaks it down for like kids probably between the ages of like 10 to 18. And it's very motivating because I think as you read that, you're like, yeah, I don't want that to happen to my brain. And I want my brain to develop well. And I want to be smart and successful. And I want to have good friendships. So I have always found it's more effective to explain to people the positive goods that we all want in life. We want friendship. We want to be successful. We want to be smart. We want to be happy, and how social media and smartphones really undermine all those things. And so trying to show them that at a brain level or at a relational level, I think it can be helpful to explain to your peers, like, listen, I think like we all want to have good friendships. We all want to be happy. And the smartphones and social media aren't delivering that to us. And even just explaining to peers, especially in the high school age, like our brains are still developing. This is a really critical period of development. I don't want to like mess up my brain by being on social media and smartphones. So I would turn to some of those resources.
Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Anastasia Shanahan. I'm a Luce Center intern this summer. And something that you talked about today was how much these big companies are interested in enslaving kids to their screens. And I just wanted to know what you thought. What do you think these companies' goal, like what's the goal here? Why are they trying to do this, and why are they trying to do this?
Yeah, explaining the business model, I think, is really important. And actually, that kind of answers your question, because another resource that parents said was really helpful was watching this documentary, The Social Dilemma, with their teens. And when the teens like realized like these companies were trying to manipulate them in their behavior, they were like totally repulsed. I mean, what teenager wants to feel like someone else is telling them what to do and manipulating their behavior, like pulling these strings behind the scenes? And so I think even explaining that, like the business model is predatory, and it's not a neutral product. They actually want us to give as much of our time and attention and data as possible to it. Like they are trying to make us addicted, and all the design features are meant to be very addictive. Like they know all the brain science research. Like they have the smartest people working on these products. And a former Silicon Valley person said, it's not that we don't have willpower, it's that there's 1,000 engineers on the other side of the screen doing everything they can to try to break down our willpower. And so I think just like putting the spotlight on the business model is just really important to understand. And the reason is, what I explained is the service appears free to us. Like you don't have to pay for social media, but we're paying with our time and attention and data because all the business model is built on advertising. So it's all advertising based. And so they're selling our time and attention and data, all that information to advertisers. And that's their profit model. And so the more time and attention and data, they sell more ads. And so of course they want children on it, and they want any user to spend as much of their time as possible, but particularly recruiting young kids. If they can hook them to their product, then they will profit off of that person over the course of their lifetime. So they want to adopt these users as young as possible and then keep them hooked as long as possible. And so it is a profit incentive for them. And so that's why every time I look at anything that they've come out and said that they're going to do to protect children is usually completely meaningless. And it's because child protection is not the goal of their platforms. It's to make as much money as possible. And as long as those things are opposed, children's well-being and their profit models, because of their business structure and because of, honestly, the lack of legal accountability that they have had, then they're not going to be incentivized to put children's interests first.
That was our last question. Thank you so much, Claire.
Yeah, and I'm happy to stick around and sign books and speak with you all.
Thank you so much.
much, Claire. That was absolutely fantastic. And we are just so grateful and thankful for you, what you're doing to equip this next generation with the tools necessary to live truly flourishing lives. So thank you so much. And we have a very fun tradition that we love to do here at the center. After we host a speaker, we love to gift them with a custom mug. This is from Grizzly Coolers. We have recently partnered with them. So it has their logo, and on the back, there is a quote from Clare Booth Luce, and it's one of our favorites. Courage is the ladder on which all other virtues mount. So here you go. Thank you so much. And we will be having a book signing back there, and there will be books available for purchase, as well as lunch will be in our boardroom. So thank you all so much for being here.